That's unfortunately true. That's unfortunately true. But sometimes the truth is finally admitted. And
Yeah,
for example, the Gulf of Tonkin, it is now finally officially admitted that the second attack never took place. It was completely fabricated and used as the casus belli to get into Vietnam, and
right,
it was a complete work of fiction. And that's now officially admitted. But again, it's not something that's ever brought up in mainstream discussions.
right. But as people lose confidence in government, which they may do if the dollar collapses, if they can't get jobs, if they keep being dispossessed of their homes, if the future that they see changes radically, then as they lose confidence in government, then they lose confidence in the government's explanations. And so people will cease believing 9/11 simply for that reason, without ever understanding the issue. They'll just say, well, they've lied to us about inflation, about employment, about the banks, about everything. So why should we believe them only on 9/11? We can't believe them on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We can't believe anything they say, so why do we believe 9/11? So that's the sort of way, if it changes, it'll happen like that. But I don't think we'll ever really find out exactly how it was done or if the government was complicit, what aspects, who was. Did the president himself know? Was this some kind of a black operation? Or whether it was just all some unusual circumstances. See, it could be just some unusual circumstances. But when there's no investigation, you can't know. And the longer it goes, the more the evidence disappears, the more the witnesses disappear. They die, you know. Uh, Things get old and become impossible to investigate. You know, they've never figured out who the killer was, Jack the Ripper, or whoever it was in England who was murdering prostitutes in, what was it, the 18th or 19th century, 19th. Still don't know. So, because it wasn't properly investigated at the time. And there's still records, but the police still won't release them. So, and we have all the allegedly all the videos of the airliner hitting the Pentagon, but they're not released. So, if they actually show the airliner hitting the Pentagon, you would think that's the first thing the government would release because it proves their point. If you can see an airliner flying into the Pentagon, then that puts so much of the 9/11 truth people down. But no, we can't release the videos.
Well, but to interject, you raise an interesting point in your article where you point out that a member of the Obama administration, the information czar, Cass Sunstein, put out a proposal for members of the government to actually infiltrate the 9/11 truth movement to spread the seeds of discontention. And that brings up the idea of things like the Pentagon, where the government really is sitting on information that would make one of the mysteries of 9/11 decidable. And it brings up the specter of such things as well. If they release a video one day of the exact shot of an airliner coming into the Pentagon, would that destroy the 9/11 truth movement? Well, only if the 9/11 truth movement builds itself on houses of quicksand based on speculation. And I think that's an important point to keep in mind. But talk a little bit more about Cass Sunstein and his interesting proposal.
Well, I just read about it that he had proposed. He's an official in the Obama administration, and this is not the Bush administration. This is a successor administration that voters thought would overthrow much of the Bush, but which have simply gone along and granted immunity and all the rest. And what Sunstein, who is a law professor, said, according to the reports I read, was that the Obama administration should have intelligence agents infiltrate the 9/11 truth movements and in a way that could be used to discredit them. So either by making really outrageous types of claims that aren't supported, or by trying to turn them in the direction of treason or conspiracy themselves so they could be arrested.
Well, to be fair to Sunstein, I believe the report was suggesting the idea that this infiltration could happen, and then the people in these movements could be turned around by the light of reason that would be implanted by these agents, or that was the gist of it. Right.
I doubt that intelligence agents would be able to affect the scientific opinion of a physicist or a structural engineer, an architect. It's costly to these architects, engineers to take a position like that. They won't ever get a government contract. Never. And not only that, their competitors will make hay of their skepticism. They'll spread talk in the community that, these people, they're not patriotic. They actually they're apologists for terrorists who blew up the buildings, and this undermines a person's business, And physicists who have spoken out, like Stephen Jones, his university ended up buying out his tenure contract, and I'm convinced it was because of pressure from the federal government. You see, physicists and physics departments are heavily dependent on government grants, federal grants. I mean, it's very difficult to find physicists of the first rank who are not supported by some form of federal government contract. And so it's your career is on the line. If you come up and say something that's out of keeping with the government's position, you're finished. Your career's over. You can't get funding. And the nature of modern physics is so complex and requires such expensive type of equipment that, or many aspects of modern physics, that without this funding, you can't be a physicist. So anyone who will face that and still speak up has got to be convinced. And they also have to be convinced in the power of truth. And they may exaggerate the power of truth. I think many of the physicists and the architects and engineers have been surprised that the evidence carries such little weight. And I think that truth often plays second fiddle just to people's emotions. They make decisions emotionally. And these decisions are not informed by evidence. They're not affected by evidence. And you can't use evidence effectively to sway decisions that are made emotionally. So when you see professionals, nevertheless, take on an issue like 9/11, then they have to be convinced, because it's so costly to them and it's so frustrating to them.
It certainly is, exactly. So they have nothing to gain by going out on a limb with these ideas that run completely counter to of course what's the accepted and what's established and what they're expected to say. So as you point out, when they put their careers on the line by going in this direction, it must be for a reason, and it's obviously in the pursuit of what they see as the truth. So it really is doubly insulting for them to be ignored so widely when they're really putting themselves on the line by staking their reputation on claims such as this. But switching tacks slightly, you yourself are obviously an economist and spent years in the Treasury and have been looking at the finance and economics for much of your life. And 9/11 obviously has many financial implications and also has many unresolved matters related to the money trail surrounding 9/11. All sorts of different attacks there, from the investigation that the SEC conducted immediately after 9/11 into the put options that were famously put not only on American Airlines and United Airlines, but also on numerous companies that were in the WTC, including some of the insurance companies that were affected that day. And that was, by the way, doubly backed up by a peer-reviewed study that came out in, I believe, the Journal of Business Studies by Alan Podishman in 2006, who concluded that it was not just a random concatenation of events. It was an unusual spike in put option activity. There was all sorts of different ways in which the money trail and financing could have told us so much about what the attacks were and who they were financed by, and yet bizarrely enough, the 9/11 Commission actually had the gall to state that to this point we haven't really determined how the attacks were financed, and it's of little relevance to our investigation. That's almost a direct quote from the Commission itself. So what can you say about the financial aspects of 9/11?
Well, I'm aware that these puts were placed and that there was large sums of money made but not claimed. And it would seem to me that it's not possible to put these kinds of puts on without revealing who you are. I don't think they can be done anonymously, but maybe they can. And so obviously they didn't want anyone to know who had foreknowledge of the event in order to make money off of it. So, but that's all I can say about it. I've never investigated it. I wouldn't know how. And but it's certainly true that it was not investigated, or if it was quickly hushed up and not reported.
And of course, also another aspect to that, in any criminal investigation where someone stands to benefit financially from a crime, obviously they would become someone who would at least be a person of interest in the investigation. And in this case, we have, of course, Larry Silverstein, who you mentioned earlier, who made the famous pull-it comment, who had just taken on the lease for the World Trade Center, and of course did actually make billions out of the insurance from those buildings on that day. So there's a prime candidate for investigation who has never been really investigated for any potential role in that day.
That's right. And that's what all of the 9/11 groups, as I understand it, contend. There's been no investigation, period. You can't expect a collection of former politicians who are not experts to investigate something like this, especially because they don't have the knowledge. They don't know what it means. And especially when the same collection of former politicians say that information was withheld. We weren't permitted to have access to information we needed, and so on. So there's not been an investigation, which itself is revealing. So even, if you want to simply be patriotic and merely report that, hey, look, how do we answer these experts? You end up damned yourself. You say, I'll be damned for holding this interview, even though I myself don't claim to have investigated the steel or the structure of the buildings or anything. I'm just reporting what all these other people have, because I find it extraordinary that there can be so much professional doubt and it have no effect. You see, what it really raises the question of, do we actually live in a scientific era? Do we actually live in a time where we believe in evidence and analysis? Or do we live in some magical era where buildings just fall down somehow because an airplane hits it, even though it's constructed to withstand airplane hits, but it just suddenly collapses. And so what I find most interesting about it is what appears to be the relative impotence of professionals, experts, and their analysis and evidence that they produce, or the challenge they present to the official story. So if evidence really doesn't count, then what kind of era do we really live in? Is this all the knowledge-based scientific era after all?